A couple of weeks ago, I was reading some local online forum and they were talking about this cool place downtown. A couple of days later, I decided to go check it out. I didn't remember exactly where it was, but I was in an adventurous mood. I took an Uber to where I thought it might be, thinking I would use Google Maps to figure it out from there. But as soon as I paid the Uber guy, I went to Google Maps and my phone died. So not only did I not know where I was, but I had no way of getting home. I started to wander around and I found this very carefully and very tightly folded up piece of paper. At first I thought it was somebody's math homework, but I opened it up and it was all a bunch of numbers written very tightly next to one another with no seeming breaks in between them. The first thing I thought of was that movie with Nicolas Cage where his son started to write down all those numbers that ended up predicting the end of the world when the aliens came and saved the chosen few from the ultimate destruction of the earth because of the exploding sun. I used to know this girl that was really weird. She had a very hard time talking to people, and when I first met her, I thought she had some type of developmental disability. But she was incredibly smart and insanely wealthy. She had a crazy amount of money. It turns out that she had a lot of lawyers that worked for her and would invest her money for her on her behalf. All she did was background research, background investigations on these potential businesses, and then she invested her money in these businesses, and she was invariably successful. The businesses she invested in always did really well, and she always made a ton of money. She let me watch her once do her calculations on how she figured out who to invest in, and I didn't understand any of it. She would write down all these numbers and use all these symbols that I'd never seen before and use all this indecipherable information to do all these mad calculations to come up with her answers. None of the symbols were Greek and none of the symbols were anything that I remembered from studying mathematics or physics. There's this theory that the transition from humans as spiritual beings to humans as physical beings was a very slow and very gradual process. One of the ways they think it happened was when we started to use not just written language, but spoken language. Historical linguists suspect one of the main driving forces to invent written language was a way to record proper nouns, people's names. It's pretty easy to come up with symbols for rivers or trees or whatever, but we needed some complicated phonetic system to record people's names. This made it very easy for us humans to see ourselves as separate physical beings once we started to imagine that we had names for ourselves. What accelerated this transition was the idea of being able to own something. They find all these ancient artifacts with people's names written on them. So written and spoken language was not only a tool to create the idea of physical separateness, but also to claim ownership. This created an idea that we were not only separate from one another, but we were not equal. This was the main driving force behind the desire to write your name on your possessions, to try to demonstrate that you could own more stuff than anybody else. But before, when we were purely spiritual beings, we were all part of the same energy field, the same consciousness field. And the best way to express that is through numbers, which are abstract and don't really exist, just like physical reality doesn't really exist. Matter is just a metaphor, a hallucination. But once humans started to believe this hallucination, this destroyed our ancient spiritual power. But if you can reclaim your spiritual self in the physical plane, it will help you to unleash your ancient powers, to gain much more wealth, to gain much more influence, to be able to practice real magic, to be able to practice real alchemy. It turns out that she taught herself how to think and speak in numbers. That's why speaking in words was so difficult for her. That's why she was able to amass massive wealth. I ended up having to wander around and read the various bus stops to figure out how to get home. Luckily, I had enough bus fare. I ended up having a pretty fun adventure, even though I never got to where I wanted to go in the first place. I never did figure out what those numbers meant. As far as I could tell, they didn't have any discernible sequence. But I'm going to hang on to this as it may be my ticket out of here when revelation comes.